had snow days, right? And we had weather issues, and so we're kind of makeshifting and doing some makeup stuff here at the end. But I am excited about tonight's conversation. Let me just tell you the roadmap real quick, and then I want to say a prayer for us, and then I'm going to turn it over to Missy. She and I were wanting to finish some of what she did on the first week of talking to your teenagers about sexuality and bringing in some of what she's seen in her practice, and just kind of what are we seeing in our teenagers and in our culture in general that our kids are growing up in. So I wanted to finish that segment of the conversation, and then what I'm going to do is just kind of walk through the stuff that's not out of my head. I'm the dummy who has to find stuff to present to you. So I've got some stuff that I want to refer you guys to some resources that have been so helpful for me in this conversation, and but then I want to close tonight with feedback. That's going to be where you guys talk. I want to hear about this series in general. I want to hear what's been helpful. What are some takeaways? What are some questions that you have as you leave here? What can we do better next time? So just and this is not a fishing for compliments. That would almost bother me if that's all this was. So I really want to have an honest conversation about what's been helpful and just how can we do better going forward, and what are some things we need to be mindful of as we leave this series. So that's kind of the roadmap for the night. Okay? So let me pray for us, then we'll get started. Father, I pray that you will heighten our awareness of your very near presence with us tonight. We know that you are very near, and you are very much working in our world, that your love and your power come together, and it's mysterious and we don't understand it all, and yet you've revealed yourself fully in your Son, and both of those things are true, and we get to explore that and recognize that and worship you and learn and grow because of your Son, and we're so thankful. And I'm thankful for this community of faith, that we get to struggle together, we get to lock arms in your kingdom together. I'm thankful to be raising this next generation of disciples with these friends of mine here. And I pray just for this conversation, would you just season it with your insight, with your wisdom, help us to hear you by hearing each other. And we trust that you are at work tonight. It's in Jesus' name, amen.
Right. Okay, so we are going to go back to a few weeks because we kind of met and we talked about a lot of stuff, and then right before I gave all the practical advice, we quit and waited 3 or 4 more weeks. So what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes to kind of recap what we talked about last time that I was talking, very, very briefly, so I can get to the so what's of the conversation. Because I think I said a lot of things that could have been anxiety-provoking without a lot of the so what do we do with that kind of conversation. So the first thing, I know we have said this over and over again, but it bears repeating, that the research shows us over and over again that the first person to initiate conversation with your kids about sexuality in a non-anxious, non-threatening way is the one they're going to go back to over and over again. I see it at my office all the time because I'm often the first one at the parent's request that's talking to their kids, and they don't, once their parents have chosen that, where they've asked me to do it because they don't want to, they don't go back to their parents, they come back to me. I had one today that's a little girl that's really struggling with a lot of things that she's not sure are normal, and the minute she comes in, she goes, "Oh, I have so many questions for you," sweet little 10-year-old. And she's been storing them for 2 weeks because I'm the safe place. And so we want to be that with our kids and our relatives. We want to be the ones that they can come to. And when you talk to them about things in non-anxious ways, you're going to get that. Now, if I said last time, if you're not the one, like if it's already happened, You already found out that your kids have had all kinds of conversations that you weren't expecting yet. That's not a deal breaker. That's not a big deal. It just means that you want to go ahead and get in there, because that can be redeemed. You just need to be having conversations with your kids about this kind of stuff. The other part of that, hey guys, the other part of that is that I want to just reiterate that if you are having conversations with your kids about important things, sexuality just becomes one of those things. If the only time you talk to your kids is when they're in trouble or to have the talk, then conversations about sexuality become a moral, don't do this. Does that make sense? So when you're having conversations regularly about who do you want to be, what are you excited about, what are you passionate about, what do you think about sex? That's just one more conversation that's happening in the midst of a lot of good stuff. If the only times, and I see this a lot with my kiddos, if the only time their parents talk to them is because they're in trouble, the only time we have a serious conversation is because you've messed up, then when it's time to start talking about sex, how do they feel? Like they've messed up. And so we just really, well, if we could encourage one thing, it would just be having regular conversations as often as you can. So watch TV together, read books together, talk about the things you see in their friends, things that are coming up in situations. And when you're having those conversations, that's when they're going to know that nothing is off the table. And then, let's see. Something else I wanted to say about that. No, I guess not. It was probably brilliant. So, okay. So a couple of things that we talked about last time we were all together. We were talking, Adam is going to bring you some more of the, like the resources that he has about how to talk in traditional ways to your kids about sexuality. And I think that's really important. But one of the things we were talking about last time I was with you guys is kind of the less traditional ways, the way the culture is shifting. And so when Kathy Burns was here talking about adults that are dealing with homosexuality and same-sex attraction, then what she said, do you remember her saying, who would ever choose that? No one would ever choose that. And what I'm here to tell you is I think that is true for adults who have been brought up in a culture that didn't support that. For teenagers, we're in a different world than we were then. And so even in the last 10 years, things have really shifted to the point that, we talked last time about how maybe you guys going to pick that up. Yes, so even 10 years ago, you were heterosexual until proven otherwise. The assumption is that you are heterosexual. That is not the case anymore. Now, it is in certain circles, but it's not across the board. And so I think kids are dealing with things we maybe didn't have to deal with about who do I want to be? And they have to think about it. They have to decide what sexuality they identify with, and that's a very different thing than what we had to deal with. So, anyways, things are shifting in culture, and I don't want to freak everybody out to where they all think everyone is dealing with this. I think I mentioned last time, Adley goes to Crockett, and she's an 8th grader, and she doesn't have any conversations about this with any of her peers. And she tells me lots of her conversations. She has plenty of concerning conversations, just not about any kind of sexuality and stuff. But I have a 7th grader at that same school that she's got 4 or 5 friends that are bi, and she's thinking about if she wants to be transgender, and they go to the same school. And this little girl is younger. So you just don't ever know. And they're both church kids. They're both kids that are in strongly church-identified families. And so I just want to encourage you that every kid is not going to have this experience. And if your child tells you they're not, that doesn't mean that they're lying. It just means that we want to be ahead of the curve. So those are some of the things we talked about. Does that sound pretty familiar to what you remember? Okay. Then let me just go into the few things that I wished I had time to tell you last time. The first one that I feel like is really important is that many people and parents believe that if they talk about controversial topics, they are going to plant ideas in their kids' heads, right? I don't want to talk to you about homosexuality because you don't know about that and you would never have thought about it. And now you're probably going to decide you're gay. I don't want to talk to you because I mentioned this is going to be all my fault. And anyways, I hear the same thing about running away. Parents are kind of concerned that their kids are going to run away because of some things they've heard, and they thought, well, I don't want to bring it up because then they'll just think about it. We have a lot of clinicians that are really worried about bringing up suicide whenever we're working with kids that are depressed or anxious, because what they think is, well, if they're not thinking about it yet, I don't want to make them think about it. And you can see that logic. I can feel that logic. But what all the research says is that is not true. You don't plant ideas in your kids' heads. That's not the way it works. If they're thinking about those things, they want to know that you're open to hear it. If they're not thinking about those things, they're probably going to go, what? And you're going to go, oh, never mind. And just move on, So I just want to let you know, you're not going to plant ideas in your kids' heads. And if you're anxious about how to have some of these conversations, I would love to talk about that. I love talking about sex. Adam would love to talk about that. I don't know if he loves to talk about sex, but I kind of love it.
I'm 1A. You're definitely number 1.
Okay. But we would be happy if you're thinking, you know what, I just don't feel like I'm walking away from here with a good idea of how to have this conversation. I would love to go to lunch and talk about it because that's an honor to get to do that. So the next thing I was going to tell you, and I feel like this is one of the most important things that no one has said to me before, is be careful how you talk about other people in front of your kids. Because I think that our kids, especially preteens and teenagers, are dealing with a lot of complicated issues that they want to be able to talk to a trusted adult about. But if you, every time you see kids making out in the mall, and you go, oh, that is so disgusting. How trashy that they would dress that way. And if they feel you making these comments, if they see you see something on TV and make a negative comment about people that have different lifestyles, you are communicating a lot about how approachable you are and whether or not you're safe. And so I wish someone had said that to me. I wish someone had said that to my parents. Because my parents were good people who made a lot of comments about a lot of people. And so it communicated to me what was safe and what wasn't safe. And when I was okay and when I wasn't okay. And so I just wish that that's something that we could all kind of grab onto. Because I think that we just want to live an example of love and compassion and availability. And they're picking that up from what we say about other people and what they hear us say more than what we say to them. Because they are like truth radars. And so I just wanted to encourage you about that. I actually have two stories that happened the week that I first was thinking through all this. I had two girls, both middle schoolers. One is considering whether or not she wanted to be bisexual. She was thinking she was interested in some girls, was thinking that she might take some action on that. In a lot of middle school circles, that's not considered a big deal. That's not considered a huge crisis when you're thinking about that. I have another girl who's considering and pretty strongly convinced that she needs to be transgender, that she was born a girl, but she thinks that she should be a boy. Now, that in any circle is still considered a big deal. That's a big decision to make. So here's what happened this week. This girl that was thinking about, do I think I might want to try to date some girls or not, had a mom who constantly belittled people that she saw on TV. And so she said to me, I know my mom will think I'm worthless if I tell her what I'm thinking. This other girl, who's thinking about changing everything about her gender, said, my parents are going to be really sad and they're not going to like it, but I have no doubt that they're going to love me. How do you know that? Because of the way they treat people. They love everybody. And it was significant to me, because I think it really communicates that the way we treat other people, they are reading and deciding whether we're safe or not. And I want to be really, really safe. So, and I'm sure you do too. Okay, so a couple more things. Ask questions and listen well. And I know we already talked about this, and so did Kathy. The best thing that I have learned in therapy is always ask what questions, not why questions. Why do you feel that way? Seems like there's a right answer and a wrong answer. What makes you think that feels safe? It's the same question. You're getting the same information. So as often as you can, there's just that's for free. It's helped me a lot. And like we talked about, when you're asking questions, if you're looking for opportunities with what you see on billboards, what you're talking about in the car, what the kids are talking about while you're driving them around, you're going to have lots of opportunities to talk about good things. And so look for that. And then the other thing I would say is, as hard as you can, work to try not to make these things lectures, but conversations. It's really easy as parents to want to constantly instruct and constantly say, this is how you need to think, this is what we need to feel, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. There's certainly a place for that. We are called to instruct our children, but also conversations are so great. And so when you are having a conversation with your kid about what do you think about that before you give them your opinion, tell me what you're thinking about that. Besides the fact that it helps you know what you need to talk about, it also it's inviting them to be connecting with you. One of the ways you can do that really well is sometimes kids are bringing up things that feel really scary to us, and so we immediately want to put ourselves on the other side. Still in my line for the camera. You see that? We immediately want to separate ourselves from whatever thing they're talking about that feels scary to us. So what I would say to you is, as often as you can, find common ground. Find the littlest thing that you can say, that makes sense to me that you think that. I can see why you would feel that way. Or, yeah, I agree with this, but here's what I'm wondering. And so I think that the more often we can find connections when we're talking to our kids and things we do agree with, they have more of an ear to hear the things that we're having trouble with. Because we've shown them, we respect your thinking, and we love it if you respect ours. And so, anyways, 2 more things, and then I'm going to pitch it over to you. One thing is, I love the idea of dreaming with your kids about what you imagine for them. I think a lot of our sexuality conversation has been around do's and don'ts. Do save yourself for marriage. Don't make mistakes you can't take back. Figure out your boundaries. All of these things that are really important, but I think sometimes we've forgotten to tell our kids why we want that for them. What is the kind of lifestyle that I'm imagining for you? What kind of marriage do I want you to have? What kind of witness do I want you to have? What kind of Christ follower do I want you to be, whether you get married or not, whether you have children or not? When you're dreaming, that's one of the things Adley said at our purity ceremony last week. Afterwards, she said that it was really helpful to her to think about who she does want to be, not just always think about who she doesn't want to be. Does that make sense? So the more we're dreaming with our kids about what we want for them, what we're hoping for them, the more opportunity we have to show them what that looks like. And then the last thing I would say is that it is really scary to see your kids becoming the adults that they're going to be and not always being able to control that. It's terrifying not being able to control your children's friends once they get into middle school. You don't do play dates anymore. They pick their friends, and there are a lot of things that are very scary. But I just want to encourage you that we keep in front of our faces the reality that God loves our children more than we do. And the reality that, yes, we have this beautiful privilege to pour into them, but we are not fully responsible for their choices. We are not fully responsible for the things that they're exposed to. So we get to be the biggest part of it. But I'm convicted during all of this that this could be really scary. But what I want it to be is empowering. I want it to be, you have an opportunity to be approachable and to let them make decisions with you as a part of them, or for them to say, I'm going to make the decision and then inform you because you can't handle it. And I want to be on that first side. And if we believe that God is working for the good of those that love Him, whatever path that looks like, it frees us up a lot to not feel so much pressure to do this all the time. And so anyways, that's just kind of the last thing I wanted to end with. Do y'all have any questions about anything that I brought last time or that I'm saying today? Anything that's connecting with you or that you have a question about?
You said the thing that you kept bringing up about the first person of your child goes to. This time you said the first, or as you said something like we approaching our child about the topic. When in the past that's been said, it's the first person our child goes to. This time you addressed it as we going to our children about it. So,
Yes, I think what I said tonight is probably more accurate, only because I think that unless you're having these regular conversations all the time, I think you're almost going to have to at least initiate in the beginning. And you can initiate in small ways. You know, you can initiate about things about puberty. You can initiate about things about the way that you protect your body when you're teaching body safety. And so I think it's a pretty natural inroad. But yes, I think probably what's more true is that you will be initiating. But the first person that they feel like was non-anxious, approachable, they will return to. Usually we have to be the one to initiate it to get to be the first person. That's a great clarification. What else? Yes, ma'am.
And talking about dreaming with your kids and what you hope for them to be. How do you do that without setting a standard that they maybe will never reach? I mean, that if they don't ever reach that, then you're a failure. I mean, is it just kind of in general? I hope you are loving and kind.
Yes, that makes sense, because we don't want to set things that make them feel like they can never get that or that they're disappointed. Absolutely, that's a good question. I think I was thinking, when I say that, what I imagine more is I'm thinking about, as opposed to saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, explaining the reason we don't have sex before marriage is because this is the way God designed it. This is what He wants for you. And some people choose a different path, and He forgives that and He redeems that. But this is what I'm imagining for you. And I think maybe less of expectations, not setting up this is who I want you to be, but more of this is what I want you to have. I want you to get these things. And you know, I think one of the things we've talked about a lot is in our culture, we never really grew up affirming singleness being okay. That wasn't something that was ever presented to me, nor would I think about presenting. I want you to get married and I want you to have babies because that's the traditional way of things. And I think that there are some ways that we can be more faithful to all the different ways that faithfulness could look. So I like what you're saying. I'm not sure, am I answering that at all?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, maybe not expectations as much as hopes for them, that you do things you want for them to get to experience. And I think that when we're explaining that, I'm just coming across over and over again that my kids that I'm working with don't understand why they're not supposed to do the things they're not supposed to do. They don't understand why anyone cares if they smoke pot. They just don't care. They don't understand why, and no one is communicating to them the realities of what all these choices they're making, the consequences. And I think that if more of us were dreaming with our kids and explaining the dangers of choices, then kids would be a lot more apt to listen and not think that we're just dumb and we don't get it. You know. So, what else? Anything else?
I think it's good to ask your children, kind of, or if you're going to present something to them, to kind of get to start with their opinions on. I would say opinions, maybe not necessarily feelings, but they will include feelings and something like that. In dealing with my problem,
Yes.
If I treat him respectfully and say, this is what you need to be done and how you can do that, and what time would be a good time for you to start your homework, and let him be responsible and handle those decisions. That cherishes that respect.
Yes. That's absolutely accurate and applies to lots of things.
A lot of other things, yes, that's just
I think that's a great point. Well said. Anybody else? All right, got her up. Ready, trade.
This is a big mistake to follow. I don't know what.
We're loving it.
Okay, so thank you for being gracious for a minute. I was just noticing something. I'm aware that this gathering is mostly involving people who have had teenagers and people that have that in front of them. Those groups make up more than who currently has teenagers, and which is really cool in one sense. And it's just reminding me that, and I'll go ahead and give you my piece of feedback of what I've appreciated. This has been as much collaborative for me, and just a chance to glean and sharpen iron and share stories and failures and questions, and Kevin does a great job reminding me regularly that just the togetherness of this conversation is always good. There's something really peaceful about that, and but I just think wisdom can really be shared and transferred here, not just knowledge. I feel like knowledge is very important to us, but wisdom is different. And there's a wisdom here that's very opportunistic. And so, anyways, I'm just kind of acknowledging that in the room, and think that might be something for us to continue to take advantage of. Let me start with this. And we're a small enough group tonight to where I kind of want to do an all skate here and let everybody chime into this. But particularly, so if you're an empty nester, what was something about talking to your teenager that was challenging or concerning, and what was something that was exciting about it? And I want to ask the same question for those that have this coming. If your kids are smaller, think about these two questions. Particularly talking about these teenage years and how this conversation looks. What is it that comes to mind?
The concerns come to my mind because in our situation, that conversation has already taken place.
Yes.
With a parent who has totally different values than what we're trying to instill in these kids.
Okay.
So the hurdles
Yes.
are what I see. And the contradictions of, where are they going to land in this conflicting
That's a great.
situation?
Man, thank you. Family looks different. Different families look different, and how does and just how the system is set up, and how the family is structured, and how communication happens, and how do you navigate that if it's a blended there's just some. Thank you. What else?
What I was taught, of course, I lived in Childress, Texas. And this is what my mother told me.
Yes.
She said, you better always be nice because you never know when I'm watching. And I believed her because Childress, Texas is small. But Amarillo is quite different
Yes.
situation than in a small town. That was true. I believed every word she said.
Yes. The all-seeing eye.
Exactly.
That's so funny. In our house, yes, ma'am.
No, go.
No, go.
I was didn't quite fit the question, but I just noticed that when we talk in general terms about sexuality or just overall, the friends, it's a lot easier, things feel more comfortable. If it's more about them personally or something, it's harder. That's where the challenging part comes in. So
Yes.
it's just something I've kind of noticed lately.
Yes.
We'll do a lot of generalities before you start.
Yes.
Yes.
I was blessed with an university child at 4 when I was pregnant with the other child at Rodney asked lots of questions, and I answered them simply, and it never occurred to me that, but I will say, my own parents were embarrassed and did never talk to me about anything. And they expected my siblings, or sisters at least, to share with me, and it wasn't effective, but I recognized the challenge was the embarrassment. So no matter what, Bobby asked. And then his sister came along, she just, the conversations continued with him. She didn't never have to ask anything on it.
Yeah.
But the challenge is control and embarrassment and hesitate to have. You just dig down and move on.
Our parents, though, didn't have this advantage to learn. They picked up from their parents, and so it's handed on, to their parents.
Yes.
And maybe I was a little bit the same way, but I want to be different with my grandchildren. So,
I think many of us are in that boat of appreciating the things in our family story, but realizing we may want to do things differently with this generation, with this opportunity.
well, it was a no-no, when I was growing up. You just don't talk about things like that. But this is wonderful that you were getting some training how to handle these situations.
That's what we agreed to.
Yes, sir.
The one thing that comes to my mind that's both kind of the most challenging thing, but kind of the most exciting thing that I can think of is describing why we are separate and apart from culture, which by the time my kid is a teenager will have even progressed, or I can imagine would progress.
Another 10 years,
farther.
yes.
And
Yes.
so trying to describe and to instill excitement in her about being separate from culture, but loving people who are fully engaged in that culture.
So I'd like for my kids and grandkids to have the compassion and love that we were not taught to have, that we didn't understand.
Because it was more of my friends have told me that you're not going to like this, but I basically lied to my child because they were too embarrassed to talk to their own child about it. And so we definitely want to change the culture and give you.
Yeah.
We've had our little separate conversations when
Well, don't be too separate. We need to glean from this. So.
End of class.
There, thank you. Okay. Well, look, that's a great prompt for me. Then I'm gonna look forward to this. Let me go quick here. And then I want to give you guys a website, the Center for Parent Youth Understanding, CPYU. Some of you that get those emails, they have a website, and it's a little bit long, but it's Sexual Integrity Initiative.com. Sexual Integrity Initiative.com. This list is one of their kind of brief documents that's on the deal. They study trends. They kind of synthesize and bring some things to their website. They have really good, just kind of some of the stuff that we talk about, just synthesized. There's some data. It's a really helpful deal, and just this over-sexualized culture as it continues to amplify that. This is one of the major initiatives of particularly in youth ministry, because of our changing culture that our kids are being raised in. But just look at some of this and notice why we all agree of the challenge of this. Okay, so, there's nothing new under the sun, and Proverbs is right, and yet this feels like some new plowed ground at the same time. And here are some of the reasons why we know this is not easy. Some of the language we've already talked about, this can be limiting. Our sex-saturated culture, we've talked about that. The growing acceptance of porn. back when I mean, this is just a generation ago. I mean, it was the magazine under the bed or out in the woods. Now it's just on the phone right here, and it's common, right? Although, and I'll get to this.
I made it sound like you were just looking at porn just now.
Yes, that is not true. I'm not doing that. Yes, it's not there. It's not on my phone. But it's very accessible. Thank you. The whole trip over my thing self that I do, she points that out. Although I do want to get to some stuff that's happening of late in just the culture at large regarding the use of pornography. We'll get to that in a minute. This one's interesting that our current young adults, that the average age is now about 27 before marriage happens. They're having to wait longer than ever. And there's so many different dynamics why marriage is being delayed, but because that's what it is, you get out of high school, 17 or 18, you get married, and you're kind of in your sexual peak, right? I mean, that's, but to have that happen later, that it's not matching up as well, and it's just a struggle for this generation. No map for questions. I found this interesting to think about if things are so complex as they're continuing to look and to be experienced, if the complexity plus a lack of conversation, what's the roadmap for this complex world, and kids are turning to other spots if it's not what we have just been talking about every week, and us being the first place. All right, so I love that we're trying to redeem that. I wonder how true this is sometimes, that our feeling that our voice is so small compared to the voice of our culture. And it's a kindergarten truth, but to realize, and I learned this 20 years ago when I was studying youth ministry, and it's still the case. Every research instrument that is given, especially to Christian teenagers, everyone says that parents are the number one influence in the life of the child. Alright? So he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. Right? And we've got to believe that, we've got to own that, and I love that we're living out that. And then, some of the stuff, what does Scripture say about this topic and this topic? And there's some things that different stances are taken, right? So that just makes it a challenge for us. Let me get through this real quick, and then I want to finish with some feedback. These are this is also from the website. I love this as far as 5 tools that we can take away. Number 1, we need to be as much students of our culture as we are students of the Word. All right, we have got to be bilingual. All right, if we're not in either, then we're in big trouble. Okay, we're expecting Alan to be the guy who does the Word for us. We're in trouble. We've got to be rigorous students of the text. We've got to be rigorous students of our culture. Okay, to understand the culture that they are swimming in and try to tap into that. I've got this CPYU website. They send out a deal. I get it every week. You can go on the CPYU website, cpyu.org, and there's a weekly newsletter, and they collect all these trends, all these articles, and what's the latest song, what's the latest movie, what's the latest study on teenagers. All that stuff is there just to be learning about the culture of our kids. cpyu.org, Center for Parent and Youth Understanding. Okay. Second thing, protect what you can and create a safe place for the conversation we've already talked about. Okay. We have to acknowledge that we can't completely control this. Right? Okay? But there are some things that we can. So what are the things that we can control? And one of the things that we can't control, acknowledge that and be talking about that with our kids. So for example, the idea about screen time and screen access at home. We still have parents that let the kid with their laptop into their bedroom with a closed door, which is crazy, right? So some parents don't yet have their kids turn in their cell phone before they go to bed. Some parents still don't have a safe browser on their kid's phone. These are things that we can control, okay? Limiting how our house functions and how much screen time they get or don't get. All right, that's something that we can control. right? So control what you can. What are the things that we can't control? That we're loaded with that, right? We can't control if my kid's friend does this to my kid. I can't control that. Now I can as best I can, but there are going to be opportunities. So that's a conversation topic. What do you think about? What do you think you're going to do when your friend slides his phone over and says, "Hey, look at this"? And that's a conversation topic, right? So I think some clarity there, and think about these are things we can't control, and let's make sure that we're continually talking with our kids about the things that we can't. And we've already talked about this becoming the authority. In the first place, we talked about sex. We've already talked about this, that talk about a positive biblical sexuality. What are we advocating for? What are we dreaming for our kids versus just the do's and don'ts? The fifth thing, create a grace-based environment, as non-anxious as we can be, as centered as we can be. What if our kids could tell us when they've messed up? And the gospel of grace and forgiveness was incarnated in how they experienced their mom and dad. I mean, heaven forbid, right? But could they feel that if that were never happened? Let me also pass out. Okay, so I've got this deal. This is out of Lasser's book, Talking to Your Kids About Sex. These are, I think there's way more than you need, but these are the two chapters. I just kind of synthesized them on about ages 10 to 14, kind of early puberty, as well as later, like 15 to 19, later puberty. All right, that's all there. You can read all that. Just to develop what's going on developmentally, what do we need to be aware of, and what are the objectives for us as parents. On the back side of that handout that I just passed out is all of this, so you don't need to write this down. Okay. This is the book, Talking to Your Kids About Sex. I got the Sexual Integrity Initiative website up there. This is some good stuff here. FocusOnTheFamily.com has some good stuff. I was talking about the culture of pornography. It's very interesting. Of late, I've seen TED Talks on this, and I've seen this Fight the New Drug. These are Hollywood celebrities that are advocating the stopping of the use of porn. It's very interesting.
Non-Christians.
Non-Christians. This is a secular movement where Hollywood stars and people that have that platform, that Russell Brand, that weird dude, for example, right? That dude, right? Okay, that Russell Brand dude is on here talking about the damages of the dude. You know what I'm saying when I say dude? He is talking about the damage. So it's very interesting. And this is one of the websites called Fight the New Drug. I saw these two TED Talks, The Great Porn Experiment. And it's actually the opposite of what it sounds like, okay? Of the giving up of pornography and killing that addiction and what that has done for that particular speaker. And another one, Why I Stopped Watching Porn. It's very interesting in the secular culture how much of a conversation this is becoming, which is in our favor, right? So let's leverage that and show that to our teenagers.
Well, and neuroscience is agreeing with it too. Because
Yes.
The evolution of MRIs are showing the ways that pornography is ruining legitimate relationship. So it's an interesting time.
Yes. You'll see here, I mean, erectile dysfunction issues that men are having in their 20s.
Wow.
Because of pornography addiction. That it's chemically and physiologically damaging, as well as relationally and emotionally, and what does real intimacy look like. I mean, and science and culture is acknowledging this, and it has nothing to do with the gospel, which is interesting. So we have a chance to say, this is because God knows what He's doing, right? So I think that's
Do you
very...
think this is increased in child abuse, or is it we just hear more of it now that we have?
what is increased in child abuse? What do you mean?
Well, it seems to me that the problem with the porn thing and child abuse, sexual child abuse,
Yes.
it seems like it's all increased in my lifetime, or maybe I'm just not maybe I wasn't just aware of it, but has it gotten
It's
worse?
probably because it's being reported.
It's being reported, that too.
Probably, I think both are true. I would guess. I think our culture is probably more sex saturated than it's ever been, but also I wonder if we're just actually talking about stuff that used to be hush hush. That's my theory. That's my theory. Any thoughts on any of this?
What is TED Talks?
TED Talks. You just type that in, TED Talks, and it's a whole. It's a website. It's just a bunch of speakers. I don't know how do you describe this?
It's like an education-based community movement, like yes, where there are people from
Every discipline.
finance, psychology, everything, and they come and talk about these topics, and they're usually
About
3 to 10 minutes. You would love them.
You would love them.
You would love them.
Yeah. TED Talks are cool. Let me ask for your. Let's close with this. I want to ask for your feedback. I want to hear just what is, if you've gone through this series to any degree. I need to hear from you on this, because we're continuing to want to make this just part of the culture of our church. This is not the last time we're going to do this, and we're learning, right? So I need to hear what was helpful, what was a disconnect, what questions did we not answer, what topics did we not talk about, what do we need to talk about more in the future. Okay, what are some things that come to mind as far as just overall feedback for this series?
Hey, Adam, you talk about helping our kids frame the messages from the world, and what that's all about, and how God's interested. I mean, He's interested in the results, which is it's all about procreation, right? Ultimately, and so the world's kind of interested in the motivation part, right?
Okay.
And so,
right.
It sells well.
Yes.
And there's a lot of practical things, I guess, that can be done, right? Like to help those kids frame that stuff.
Yes.
I know sometimes we were watching stuff and you'd see this hot and heavy love scene come on some show, and then you could say, "Man, I hope those people are married." I used to do that. One time, Spencer, we were watching some show, and he turned around and he said, "Dad, don't worry, I think they're married." I guess he's getting it. Anyway.
You heard his daddy? Yeah, those are good thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to speak. We decided before we came in this room that
Yeah, be careful.
maybe I better turn this back.
Yeah, no,
We are grateful to be involved in this, and we want to do more of it, and it's a very positive thing for the church culture here, because I believed that it would have been very helpful to me in a multitude of ways to have had open conversations with someone, maybe especially my parents, and so I'm all for it.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing this.
It's good, Adam. Appreciate it.
I would have to say I really appreciate learning how culture is changing, because even when I learned about this stuff as a child, and I have to tell my child so many more things because there just wasn't that much to talk about when I was, a kid. And so it's nice to hear things like this coming from the church, and from the church perspective, to know how to talk to my child about it.
And hearing this information with dignity, treating with dignity is the whole thing.
I hope that avenues continue to be open within the church. Like coming on Wednesday, this is kind of my get out of the house night.
Yes.
And so having somewhere to go that's beneficial, that I'm learning, I'm taking in things that that help me, help our family. But to just have something ongoing and it's not just like once a year thing.
Okay. Yep.
You know, there were occasions where I felt the classes were too short, that there should have been some information time and a longer question answer discussion.
Okay.
Processing, because it seemed like we just got started and then we had to leave. And the next week there was a snow, and then 4 weeks later we're finishing a conversation and I don't remember what questions I had. So, I mean, I would even, you know, I know that financial peace goes for 2 hours. And I don't know how that would look or work. I mean, especially if you got kids, but having opportunities to have more processing, whether it's 2 classes on the subject and the 3rd week is processing. You know, if it looks like
Optional
that.
discussion time.
Yeah, you know, we'll just stay for another appointment. Yeah. But I'm sure, you know, there's so much more processing that I need. You know, so.
I'm excited about the future though, because even as short as these classes have felt, the more that we talk about this, the more comfortable we will be. Because the other thing I think that I see for the church's future is that conversations like this one will be key to the church moving forward, because we're going to have people, we already do, but we have people that come in that have totally different views, and if we don't know how if we don't know where we stand on these things, it's incredibly difficult for us to love them and to bring them in and show them
in a non-anxious way.
In a non-anxious way, right? Kids or adults.
And I was just thinking about this too, because you mentioned this about what God's plan is, and that His ways are better. I mean, I know that maybe seem like a given, but maybe it's not. And maybe one of these classes needs to be, this is really the God's view of, and this is why it's better. I mean, I know that kind of woven a little bit into this, but maybe a lot of people don't know how to explain that correctly to their child, of saying, this is really why it's better. You know, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I know from my personal experience, the choices I made, when I made the right one, I don't really think it was necessarily for the right reason. It was just because I didn't want to get in trouble.
Fear repairs, yeah.
I mean, you know, it wasn't because I thought, now in retrospect I can look back and say, I knew people who made different decisions and I see the pain it caused them.
Yes.
And I'm so glad I didn't make that decision. And so, but I want to be able to tell my children now, don't just do it because you're afraid of me or because you don't want to disappoint me.
Right.
This, and this.
Right.
Please guard your heart.
Well, and we really
I mean, you know, just different.
Well, that's helpful. I'm hearing, I mean, we didn't plan for 4 weeks of the theology of sex. I mean, that's not what this was. And it's kind of to your point. I wonder if I'm going to talk to our preacher. Let him deal with that one. Right. So, but yeah, I mean,
No, we said we wanted discussion time. No, I'm just.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I will not get that to you. No, but I mean that to maybe assume that. I mean that's interesting. So that's helpful.
And I don't know about for Tanner. I don't know if some of these things might be good for them. I don't know if they were ready, but they need to be.
They need to be. Now the youth ministry probably engaged that more than this class is adults.
They have 4 weeks.
Yeah.
On sexual identity and what is God's plan.
Right.
And 2 are teaching and 2 are discussion.
Okay.
So they did do
Yeah.
that.
So yeah. But yeah, I think that's a great thought. What else?
With my concerns that I voiced a minute ago, I would like to see some prayer partnerships come out of this, because I do believe that God has the power to overcome,
Yes.
you know, and so I'm not in a defeated place when I said I have concerns. I do have concerns. I'm not stupid, but but I do believe that, you know, we can come out on top of this, and our God's view can override.
Yes.
I don't know, kind of the camaraderie that would come along with everybody praying for our kids in this specifically for their sexuality and purity.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say, I'm a grandparent, so it's
really interesting and cool for me to get to hear this, and I can be a support to my daughter with the grandparents who are around me. It would be great just to have more of this information, you know, when I was parenting my kids, but it's never too late to be a support. So in saying that, I think it's cool, like he said, the more we do, the better. I just think it just should be weaved into our, as a part of our community, just to keep it, because seeing the fear of it and for lack of better words,
The taboo kind of
sex, the problems we have with it, it loses its power.
Yes.
You know, we bring it out and open, we talk
to the light, yes.
So the ugly things about it loses power the more open we are about it.
Yes.
So, some really good ideas on how to help. I think it's really good.
Well, let me specifically commend the grandparents. That is, there's actually a lot of in family ministry, the stuff that I'm reading, the power of grandparenting is, I'm seeing that a lot. And so when I say parents are the number one factor, I want to reinforce that the grandparents among us, that is a powerful voice. And even long distance, my kids' 4 grandparents, that's just such a platform. So I've been thankful for that.
I was going to say one more thing. She said something about, you know, she made her choices about sex and more about fear. And the big thing about that is, you know, fear doesn't last as long. It's not the thing that drives you to make the decision when you're not around your parents, not as much. With some kids it is. But I think it's really cool that we can do it where it's like more of a cooperation, it's sort of open. We take the anxiousness out of it, and we just really teach that it's out of love, and it's out of grace, and it's part of God's plan, and it'll go deeper and it'll last longer. So, because I know, I was thinking about when you were saying what were some of the things that I remember about talking about sex. I think I talked about it more out of fear, and when things didn't go my way, I may even talked about it more of like a tantrum kind of thing, and I could tell when that wasn't really working, but I didn't really know how to switch gears and do that different. But I do think I did some things right, because there were other things that I was more open, and my kids came to me, and that's one of the things, like with Nadia, I think that's what saved her life, because she came to me and said, hey, I'm doing drugs, if I don't get help, I'm going to kill myself. So I think that just adds to that. It's really important that your kids have a safe environment to come to and tell you, even though they know you're not going to be happy or approve of it. They need a safe place.
Yes, ma'am. God's blessing on you guys. I'm so thankful. Y'all have a great night.